Greetings and salutations. Today we're dealing with the Kirov wolf attacks, which were a series of attacks that rocked the Soviet Union between 1944 and 1954, a straight decade of terror in 9 districts of the Kirov Oblast. Now, these weren't your typical wolf sightings or encounters. These creatures had been turned into man-eaters who claimed the lives of 22 children between the ages of 3 to 17. And they were so fearsome and deadly, there are still some people who, for one reason or another, believe that it was in fact werewolves or some other mythological monster who was actually responsible for this. Now, it all began in the midst of World War II, and as the Soviet Union was fighting for its survival. This is when something sinister seemed to be brewing in the Kirov Oblast, with the hunters drafted into the Red Army and the firearms seized from the villagers. This gave an opening to the wolves, one which they exploited to run amok. They weren't just lurking in the forests anymore. They were boldly strolling through the villages, in a manner reminiscent of the Paris wolf siege, prowling in the outskirts and in the streets as if they owned the place. As the war raged on, their usual prey, cattle, dogs, and other small animals, dwindled, and this pushed the hungry predators closer and closer still to human settlements. Now you can imagine looking out your window and seeing not a wolf, but an entire pack sauntering down your street. This was not an uncommon sight for those in Kirov during those dark days. They were even noted as lounging around in broad daylight at Sanctuaries City Park, and they were so bold that they were noted to show no fear of humans, acting almost as if they were another stray dog. The attacks did not seem to be random either. They happened almost like clockwork, always between April and December, coinciding with the wolf's cubbing season. It was almost like they had a schedule, like they were taught, or being actively led by an intelligence. And once the season hit, it was open season on unsuspecting children and teens. At one point they even found the hair of an adult woman in the bellies of one of these beasts. So as the world was busy fighting a climactic war for the fate of the world itself, the people of Kirov were fighting a battle all their own. A battle against an enemy that was supposed to be nothing more than a howling menace in the night. But for those 22 young souls and their families, these weren't just wolves. They were monsters lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike at any moment. Let's dive into the tale of the Kirov wolf attacks proper. This was where villages around the Kirov Oblast found themselves under siege by a ferocious pack of hungry wolves who seemed to have a particular preference for children. This story unfolded in 1944. In the heart of the Kirov Oblast, nestled within the vast Soviet Union, in particular the southwest Siberian region. This area was primarily a place for exiles during the Tsar's reign. From the early 1700s to the 1900s, it was a dumping ground for society's undesirables, and they would endure famines during the Russian Civil War, along with devastating outbreaks of diseases, so they were already in an almost permanent bad way. Fast forward to 1944, and Kirov, along with many provincial towns, were feeling the weight of the war, with every single able-bodied man and woman sent off to face against the German forces. This would leave the town with realistically only the elderly, the infirm, and the very young as residents. Now, the unfortunate thing about those who were taken from this area was that they were just handed uniforms and guns and set off to defend against the German onslaught. However, those who marched away would not comprehend the reality that would set in Kirov, as it was now vulnerable without its fighting men or its huntsmen to keep the beasts at bay. It seemed that this remote corner of the Soviet Union would be all but cut off from the world, as fear gripped the heart of its people, and they would have to huddle together, praying for the return of their loved ones, while the wolves' howls echoed in the distance, as a constant reminder of the dangers which now resided just beyond their doorsteps. Now, things began to go as bad as a screen door on a submarine on September 1944, when everything kicked off with a heart-stopping incident in the settlement of Brukovsky, when a wolf snatched an 18-month-old and dragged them into the woods. This was a nightmare come to life for their family. But just before tragedy truly struck, a rather brave group of peasants swooped in and gave the wolf a rather angry taste of its own medicine, and they were even able to rescue the child while delivering a blow to the beast that it would never forget, without the child being harmed in any long-lasting way, just a little bit shook up. Unfortunately, things would not end there. Just days later, In a communal farm near Melsky, a young girl was innocently watching horses in the meadow when she fell victim to the vicious attack of another wolf. However, even though she was bitten and shaken up, she got real lucky and escaped with her life. Unfortunately, while she was lucky, it seems luck was a fickle mistress, and on September 21st, Goldavenshchina village had an incident where a 13-year-old girl named Valentina Staryava found herself in the clutches of a wolf near a riverbank, and across the way another wolf was mauling a calf to death. Unfortunately, unlike the previous two individuals, Valentina wasn't as lucky, and all that was left of her was a rather grim reminder, just bits and pieces of the 13-year-old's mauled leg, which had been clearly devoured by the ravenous beasts. And the horror would continue on November 6th, in the village of Kolkos of Alexandrovsk, where the wolves struck again, this time targeting an 8-year-old girl, as they tore her apart in broad daylight. 2 days later, the tragedy struck yet again. In Petrovsky, Tamara Munshinova, a 14-year-old postwoman, would meet a gruesome end at the jaws of 9 wolves as they devoured her alive. And on the 19th, Maria Polakova was a 16-year-old who fell victim to the relentless predators while returning to work with her sister in the forest clearings of the Ramnesky locality. With each and every attack, the wolves seemed to grow bolder, systematically targeting the most vulnerable, children, and it became such a terrifying pattern that it left the people of the Kirov Oblast living in a near constant state of fear, for they would not know when the next child would be attacked. Later, in the spring of 1945, there was a chilling escalation as wolf attacks began to occur at a much higher rate all across the Kirov Oblast. In April 29th, within the Goldyayavechina village in the Rudiesky district, a 17-year-old found themselves in a veritable nightmare. As she tended to her duties, it seemed that there was a wolf stalking her deep within the dense vegetation, hiding just outside of sight, and without warning it would pounce on her, dragging her across a field. Heedless of her screams, the wolf continued, and as the villagers who heard her rushed to her aid, it seems the wolf had shown itself to be rather strong, as he carried her and scaled a 1-meter tall fence, dragging the poor girl around 200 meters before releasing her. Almost as if out of a bad movie, the wolf would brazenly follow villagers around to the back edges of the village, and now, undeterred by the cries or even threats, including the throwing of stones, the wolves would continue to attack, each time more and more brazenly. The next day, they would strike again. This time, rather than a human, the wolves snatched a lamb from the midst of the village. These brazen attacks caught the attention of G.P. Kamenensky, the official who had been tasked with investigating the incidents. He would go on to theorize that the wolf's boldness stemmed from the absence of hunters and firearms, as they had all been requisitioned to serve on the Eastern Front. May 1st, in Mamayevaschina village, within the Vasilosky locality, another terrifying encounter would occur. This time, a 7-year-old by the name of Voldaya Gorev fell victim to the monstrous quadrupeds. A wolf would grab him by the throat and drag him towards the forest. However, miraculously, it seems a villager had refused to surrender their firearm as they fired a singular shot, forcing the wolf to release his grasp. Though shaken, the 7-year-old survived thanks to having worn a rather thick scarf, which protected their neck. But not all of these incidents could have happy endings. In Shiryevo village within the Neminsky district, a 5-year-old by the name of Bima Moklova would start their day rather innocently. However, things would take a tragic turn. As they were washing their rubber boots with a friend, a wolf snatched her up and disappeared into the wilderness. However, once the search party that was launched found her, they were met with a lifeless body, her throat bitten, and parts of her mangled corpse missing. These harrowing accounts paint a grim picture of the terror that befell the Kirov Oblast. With each attack, the wolves grew bolder, seemingly undeterred by the human presence, and now even aware of the lack of firearms in almost the totality of the Oblast, leading them to become veritable armies of raiders. Between 1946 and 1950, the Kirov Oblast would continue to be plagued by an ever-increasing surge of wolf attacks. Several districts from Darovinsky, Levzinki, Zovzisky, and Nolinsky along with Kalhutysky and Orchadvisky, bore the brunt of the onslaught. And the numbers tell a rather grim tale. In 1946, the returning hunters were able to take down a staggering number of wolves, which some claim to be over 500, and over the next 3 years the situation would worsen, as while Kirov's hunters were assisted by their counterparts from Moscow, they were forced to eliminate what some accounts claim to be more than 1,000 wolves. And this task was no easy feat, since they were hindered by a lack of proper transportation due to the rurality of the settlements, forcing the hunters to fight what was an uphill battle. However, even with all these wolves being slain, in 1947, the wolves would strike another settlement, Rusanovo. In a chilling series of events, a small girl and a 13-year-old would fall victim to the relentless predators, as further tragedies unfolded still in Chernadievo village, where the wolves attacked Anna Mankiva and her mother as they worked in the fields. And even though the mother bravely fought back, Anna would be severely injured before help arrived. And the nightmares would persist into 1948, where between July and August, 9 more children, ages 7 to 12, would meet their untimely demise. But the most haunting incident would occur on November 17, 1948, in the Novinsky district, where 8-year-old Svetlana Telver was snatched up by 5 wolves while walking home from school with her companions, and despite their efforts, only her bloodied coat would be found, and it was a chilling reminder of the danger that still lurked in the woods. As if that weren't enough, by the summer of 1950, fresh tragedies would strike, where 3 girls and a boy, aged from 3 to 6, would fall victim to the relentless onslaught of the merciless predators. By 1951, significant progress had been made in clearing Kirov of these deadly threats posed by the veritable army of man-eating wolves. However, Orchivesky remained a vulnerable locale, as in the village of Traskova, tragedy would once more strike. On April 29, 1951, a 10-year-old girl would lose her life while washing her clothes in a small river. Neighboring areas would suffer the persistent dangers of wolf packs chasing children, seemingly having learned from the larger one, which had terrorized the Oblast, as they frequently chased children who were collecting mushrooms and berries in the forest surrounding the settlements. The attacks would escalate once more on June 1952, when 11-year-old Zoe and 15-year-old Lydia Votruvnia were hospitalized after brutal wolf attacks within the village that they lived. Just a month later, in July 11, 1952, a 5-year-old Vitaly Ishutin would fall victim to a wolf attack about 1 kilometer from his village, as he was carried off into the forest. The terror continued as an 8-year-old would be bitten by a wolf just within the village of Koshili, and on August 12th, a 6-year-old would be snatched up from the forest. Then, on June 17, 1953, a terrifying incident would unfold in the village of Sragisty in the Beliski district, where a 12-year-old found himself surrounded by 3 wolves while in a playground, as the wolves seized him and dragged him some 300 meters before he managed to grab a branch and freed himself of the wolf who had grabbed him. Fortunately, he was able to flee to safety. Remarkably, this would mark the final recorded non-rabid wolf attack in the Kirov Oblast. Unfortunately, things would not end there. In the spring of 1954, a lone rabid wolf would unleash havoc in the Uzhminsky district, attacking 3 people and leaving them with chilling reminders of the dangers that wolves still posed. However, despite the lingering dangers, the frequency of attacks would slowly wane, as people learned to be more cautious, and the wolves would once again learn the firearms that the town now possessed once again. And it became apparent that preventative measures, such as not allowing children to wander in the now recognized wolf-infested area, was a recipe for disaster. This was a sobering reminder that even during the nuclear age, the fragility of life and the unpredictability of nature were still ever present. In the tail end of the Second World War, and in the midst of the Cold War, where rapid societal and technological advancements occurred elsewhere, this remote district in Russia seemed to remain at the mercy of wolves, Europe's ancient foe, for nearly a decade. Perhaps the most straightforward lesson that the people of the Oblast learned was to respect the wild and never underestimate its dangers. After all, humanity learned to fear the dark for a reason. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.